And for more, let's turn now to Richard Weitz in Washington, D.C. He's the director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. Thanks very much for speaking to Al Jazeera. If we could first get your reaction to the news of Kim Jong-il's death.
Well, it was anticipated that he was going to die soon since he looked ill. He had disappeared for a while in a stroke. But people here were never sure when, and that was very important, the when, because he's in the process, or was in the process, of delicately transferring power to his son in what it has to be a contested succession process, because the son is so young and so inexperienced. We're pretty certain that a number of the North Korean generals, some of the veterans of the revolution and the war with the United States and beyond, are uncomfortable having someone so young and inexperienced in charge. The thinking was if he could have survived maybe 5, 6 years longer, he would have been able to push that through. But because his son he's died so young, his son is still vulnerable. So it's almost like an animal pack, that if the mother is able to survive long enough to raise her child to be very strong and powerful, then this child can take over. But if she dies young, then the other hyenas I'm thinking of would go after and kill or banish or ostracize the youngster. So I'm afraid he might be in charge of the funeral planning, but we anticipate there'll be some kind of succession struggle very soon.
And how worried do you think the U.S. is about this possible power struggle ahead?
It could be very bad. We've been very lucky that the past year it's been very quiet. As you recall, the previous year was terrible. They were sinking of the South Korean warship. They were shelling on the border. But for the past year, it's been very quiet, and we've been sort of wondering why. It's been thinking as maybe they're pushing through the succession struggle. Next year, we're supposed to be a big celebration, the centennial of the birth of the great leader, the transformation of the country into a prosperous state, and they had a bunch of designations. Now that's all called into question. And you can play it out two ways. It could be that because of the internal confusion, the succession struggle, they'll go back to why they're called the hermit kingdom. They'll just go back to isolation, try and seal out the outside world as they sort out their internal differences. But there was some thinking that the problems we were having last year was because their father was trying to show how tough and strong he and his son could be. And so they were trying to act very belligerent. And there's a fear now that we're going to see this kind of contest, that they'll try and show how tough and strong they are, and that means the rest of us are going to suffer.
And Richard, before this announcement of Kim's death, there were reports that there were months of behind-the-scenes political, diplomatic negotiations between the U.S., North Korea, and China. Is that what you were hearing, and do you expect that this will continue in light of what's happened?
Yes, and in fact, a few days ago, and even today, there was indication that there was going to be some kind of deal that the Americans were going to give large quantities of food aid to the North Koreans, and in return, the North Koreans would make some kind of concessions. Now, we've tried that several times before, and it never really worked out in the implementation stage. But, you know, for lack of something better, they were going to try it again. And now, again, this is calling everything into question. So that's true. And the Chinese it's going to be interesting how they play it, because whenever you talk to them, they don't want to talk to you about this subject. They're very sensitive. They're the ones who are actually most worried about the implosion of North Korea. And they want to work with the U.S. to prevent any chaos from spreading, but they don't want the United States to move its troops north. They don't want to see the collapse of the regime, and they have a bunch of other red lines. And so it's going to be a very delicate negotiation between China and the United States as we both, as well as the other surrounding countries, observe what happens in North Korea.
Richard, thank you very much. Richard Weitz is the director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Well, one country which is no doubt watching developments in North Korea very closely is its neighbor to the south. The South Korean news agency Yonhap is reporting that the country's military has been put on alert. All government workers have been asked to report for duty immediately. An emergency meeting of South Korea's National Security Council has also been called. Well, joining us on the line from Busan in South Korea is Brian Myers. He's the director of the Department of International Studies at Dongseo University and a North Korea expert. Sir, if I could first get your reaction to this news that Kim Jong-il is dead.
Well, I was just giving a final exam to my students this morning. It's morning here. Well, it's just early afternoon now. But I came out of the exam room and was told about it. I was actually surprised because Kim Jong-il had been looking a little bit healthier than he looked even 2 or 3 years ago. Of course, we all knew he was going to go perhaps within a year or two, but I didn't expect it this quickly.
And as we were reporting, South Korea clearly very concerned, and they've been getting ready for this eventuality for a long time, haven't they?
They have been readying for it quite a bit. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why the South Korean president was trying to sort of raise the South Korean public's awareness of the need to begin saving money for unification, was because they were aware that Kim Jong-il could go any day and that would heighten the risk of regime collapse up north.
How great do you think that possibility is with Kim Jong-il gone and the succession plan not fully in place?
Well, let me put it this way. This couldn't have happened at a worse time, I think, for the North Korean government, because they're supposed to be going into a celebratory year. 2012 was supposed to be the anniversary of Kim Il-sung's birth. It was supposed to be the year in which the country would formally enter the strong and prosperous country phase. It was supposed to be a time of great rejoicing and pride in North Korea, and instead of which they're probably going to be heading into a period of heavy mourning. Formally speaking, the mourning period is supposed to only last until the 29th of December. I would be very surprised, though, if we don't see mourning ceremonies continuing into the new year. And in 1994, that sort of thing was a very important factor in the famine that broke out, because people were being taken away from their workplaces too often for these ceremonies. In short, I think it's coming at a very bad time. The North Korean regime really has dragged its feet a little bit in glorifying the heir apparent Kim Jong-un. The media has been very slow to offer any details about his life to the North Korean people. So they may find it a little bit difficult to accept him. On the other hand, I don't consider an out-and-out power struggle likely, because the regime's legitimacy derives directly from the myth of Kim Il-sung. The country is often referred to as Kim Il-sung country inside North Korea. And I just cannot imagine somebody coming from outside that line and taking over without the regime collapsing very quickly.
So go ahead.
Well, the best thing I can compare it to would be if you're a monarchist in England, you might not be too happy about Prince Charles taking over upon the Queen's death, but you would still support that because you support the system. And I tend to think that's what the mainstream is going to do in North Korea as well. But it's still a very, very dangerous time, because this is really a far-right state. It's a far-right, ultra-militaristic, ultra-nationalist state. And when such states feel insecure, they tend to resort to military tension with the outside world to rally support around them. So I think the South Korean government is very wise to be putting its troops on high alert at the moment.
And what do you think is going to happen in the interim while this succession plan is worked on? Does the military take over power?
I would be very surprised if the military took over openly. I don't think that would happen. I foresee something more along the lines of what we saw in 1994 when Kim Il-sung died and Kim Jong-il de facto was in control, but he was lying very low. I think that's what we're going to see now, is the country, the propaganda apparatus, focusing primarily on mourning the dear leader, as they like to call him, while behind the scenes they simply get the public ready for Kim Jong-un's emergence as the leader. I don't foresee any real military turmoil or the military taking over formally. That would imply that the government is in an emergency crisis situation. And I don't think they want to do that.
So who is in power then at this juncture while a successor is yet to be formally announced?
Well, I would be very surprised if the heir apparent, as young and inexperienced as he is really taking over formally. I would expect that Chang Sung-taek, in other words, Kim Jong-il's brother-in-law, who's also occupies a very high position inside the North Korean regime, that he is the gray eminence, so to speak, who has the reins of the country in his hands at the moment. And of course, the military, the army in North Korea does play a very significant role, but it's not a junta. It's not a military-ruled state. North Korea defines itself as a military-first government. That means that the party puts the military first. In other words, the Workers' Party is still in control. It doesn't mean that the army itself is in power.
Okay, and why is this succession to the third generation so different from Kim Il-sung transferring power to Kim Jong-il back in 1974 when he named Kim Jong-il as his successor?
Well, right there, you've got the answer, really, because Kim Jong-il was known to the public as the heir apparent for a good 20 years before he took over. And all the details of his life, of course, there are mythical personality cult glorified details. Still, the North Korean public knew about his life. They had a version of his life. They could understand the logic according to which he was the only possible person who could take over the country. Whereas the North Korean print media, to my knowledge, has still not explicitly explained that Kim Jong-un is Kim Jong-il's son. This has given rise to rumors among some Japanese experts that perhaps the heir apparent, Kim Jong-un, is going to be announced as having been Kim Il-sung's son and not Kim Jong-il's son. I don't think that's very likely at the moment, but according to the propaganda, there's still some wiggle room there. They could pretty much invent any kind of past for this man that they wanted to. But that's not a good thing, because the people are wondering why they haven't learned more about him up till now. So the government is going to really have to try to make up for all the stuff that it did not do over the past few years in a very, very short period of time. And I don't think any propaganda apparatus would envy that task.
All right, thank you very much for your insights. Speaking to us on the line from Busan in South Korea, Brian Myers, Director of the Department for International Studies at Dongseo University and a North Korean expert.